Happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Kaitlin. And to all.
And everybody out there. Yep. You're listening to Making Sense. Welcome and thanks for being here. I'm Kaitlin Sopoci-Belknap, Move to Amend's National Director. And I'm here in Sacramento, California, where I live.
And I'm Greg Coleridge, Outreach Director here in Northeast Ohio, where I live.
In case you're new, Making Sense is the show we do every Friday to make sense of the news this week and also give an update on what's going on at Move to Amend, which is the campaign to pass the We the People Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that will make clear that money is not speech, so that campaign spending can be regulated, and also that corporations are not people, so that corporations are not able to use the Constitution against us when we try to regulate their behavior or curb their excess or protect ourselves from corporate harm. And we thought we'd start with an update on Move to Amend first, and then we'd get into the news. So we're just chugging away. Our amendment has been introduced in the House of Representatives. This is the 5th Congress that We the People Amendment has been introduced in, and it's House Joint Resolution 48. We have our little bit of a ridiculous sticky thing where it has been introduced, but because the House is not up to the number 48 in their joint resolution introductions, it isn't actually publicly on the congress.gov site. And so we are hoping that it will get there soon. They're on 45. So we were hoping this week that 2 more House joint resolutions would be introduced, but no such luck. So they're still on 45 and we still wait for that official notice. But that's not stopping us from doing our work to have meetings with congressional offices and talk to either their staff or the representatives themselves and ask them to come on, and you can help us do that. You can find out all the details of who our top targets are and if your congressperson is on the list, and also who's signed on already. If you go to movetoamend.org/117 campaign, 117 for the 117th Congress. And Greg, was the new Congress member that you got a meeting that you had this week, or you had that meeting a little bit ago?
No, that was yesterday.
Okay, so we have a couple new reps that got added on this week. Again, even though you can't see this, there were some new additions. I don't know if we want to just mention them. I can. I didn't kind of plan to do this, but I can actually probably pull them up really quickly, especially if you start with the one that I know that you were working on.
Yeah, well, several really terrific constituents from the 2nd Congressional District in New Hampshire actually did the heavy lifting in meeting with the aide, and that representative is Annie Custer, who is a supporter of the For the People Act, and that was used as sort of leverage and reference to say, well, this is kind of a stepping stone to supporting the We the People Amendment. If you really believe in your heart of hearts that's a very good piece of legislation, well, hey, legislation can be overturned unless it's sort of defended with a constitutional amendment that makes sure that money's not speech and corporate entities are not people. And just other thing to say is that Annie Custer was not on our initial list of priorities. So all to say that if you go to that website and you don't see that your congressperson is on that list, that's okay. You can still go after him or her.
Yeah, we're happy to work with you on that too. So there's resources on that page for how you can get started. And then we'll join you in that meeting. We'll help you get access to sending messages to other Move to Amend supporters in your congressional district who could join you and us in doing that meeting. So we picked top targets based on kind of, their past voting record, whether they've committed to supporting the We the People Amendment when they've been running for office and by taking our pledge to amend, whether they live in a district where we have already passed ballot initiatives, and so they have a mandate from their voters and constituents already. And then also just which caucuses they belong to and kind of who they already align with. But as Greg said, there definitely are some other folks who, if you think your rep would be good, or you just want to, find out what their position is, so then you can act accordingly as they're up for re-election next year and beyond, then let's do it. And there were a couple new ones too. I think our page hasn't been updated yet. So if you go to 117 campaign, like I said, there were a couple that were added this week, even though there's not an official public place to see this. So we're getting those updates. But Doris Matsui, who's my Congress member in Sacramento and has been a co-sponsor in the past, signed back on as well. And I think Tim Ryan from Ohio was one of the new additions too.
He was on before.
Yeah, he was on before, but he hadn't signed on yet this time. And then Adriano Espaillat from New York City, had a good meeting with himself, which is always nice when the congressperson takes the time to prioritize meeting instead of sending a surrogate. And then Don Baer from Virginia. I think those are the 4 that got added this week, plus the...
Tim Ryan's running for Senate in Ohio, so if he wins the Senate, hey, who knows?
Hey, that's... Yeah, I mean, he's an interesting person, so not sure if you guys would want him to be your senator in other ways, I'll say, but appreciate his support for the We the People Amendment and the people of Ohio who have pushed that and pushed him to be a champion there. So that's our update. But if you do have any questions, you can ask us them at any point. You can also chime in to this conversation. So if you have things to add to what we're saying, feel free to. And as you have seen, we can add your comment to the screen so others would see it too, regardless of which platform. Because we're on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And so if you say comment from YouTube, we can stick it up so the people on Facebook can see it too, and we can have a conversation all together.
Yep.
So is there anything else you want to add about the We the People update for folks?
Can't think of anything other than, just to say this is something that just needs to happen. And it doesn't happen, magically or automatically. It has to be done through conscious and deliberate effort. So anything you can help from your end to help us, and we will certainly help you. You don't have to go into this, lonesome. As Kaitlin said, feel free to reach out. And don't be scared. Don't be scared, because this is something that's just absolutely essential to make these people who we elect accountable to us. And certainly a piece of that accountability is to find out where they stand on issues. And, they will oftentimes, as they have to us, even if we've been doing this for decades, sometimes give us a hard time, but just being insistent and persistent is so very important.
Absolutely. Maybe we should just take Jake's question right now before we move into the news of the week. He's asking, how does the We the People Amendment help curb campaign financing? Do you want to answer that question?
Well, by no longer anointing political money in elections as a form of First Amendment protected free speech, it allows the legislative branch, meaning your city council, your state, your county council, your state legislature, and our federal Congress to once again have the sole power and authority to decide how much money should be in elections, for, how long. We might even be able to limit election seasons. That could potentially be the case. Right now, you can't do that. I mean, there's just a whole range of things. We could create a system of forced campaign, full public financing. Right now, it can only be voluntary. There's just a whole litany of potentially democratic ways that we, the people, directly through the initiative process, we can even go, do an end run around public officials in those places that allow direct ballot access, to create the law that says, hey, candidates can only accept X number of money, or we're going to force candidates to, give full public financing to where they don't have any private financing. A whole range of things are at our disposal that right now are not.
And just to, you kind of said this, but just in case this is kind of like new to anybody, so, the reason why they're not at our disposal is because the Supreme Court has interpreted through Citizens United, but also cases before that, campaign spending to be protected under the First Amendment, which, if you remember the way that it works, if something is a constitutional right, then that means the government can't pass laws to in any way encroach on that right. And so with the First Amendment being equated as, including campaign spending, that money spent. So the way that we shorthand say that is money equals speech, according to the Supreme Court. And of course, that means it's built in that, okay, so then if you have more money, then you actually have more access to the First Amendment in this area. And we obviously see that play out in our elections where, those who are wealthy have much more influence over who runs for office, who can win when they run for office. And that's true of individuals, but then also corporations, since corporations are people. And that's why we connect those two issues, and our amendment addresses both of those two issues.
So it's a lot more than Citizens United. And our amendment is a lot more than simply the political money in elections, whether it's from wealthy individuals or corporate entities.
Yep. And obviously this ties into almost every other issue, which is part of, what we do with this broadcast, but also, if you're not already on the Move to Amend supporter list, we try to make a point to help draw the connections in an ongoing way so that it's clear why this foundational amendment, which would make it's not like it would make democracy happen, but it would make democracy more possible than it is now, because we don't have meaningful way to regulate corporate behavior and or money in politics, because those things are shielded by our Constitution through Supreme Court interpretation of granting those powers of constitutional protections to corporations, or expanding the idea of what the First Amendment is to include spending money. So to that end, maybe we can pivot on to the news of the week. And we're going to talk a lot of things, but we did just want to say that, in my book, the main news that I've been paying attention to this week has been what has been happening in Gaza and the attacks and aggression and, really brutal bombings perpetuated by Israel against Palestinians in Gaza. And in the interest of, trying to expand settlements into an area where Gaza is the most concentrated place for humans in the whole world, because it basically is an open air prison that is created by the Israeli military and government. And now it's under attack from all directions. There's nowhere for people to go. So, civilian apartment building, multiple story apartment building decimated. The whole incident started over the last couple of days with an airstrike against one of the holy mosques in Islam at the beginning of Ramadan. So just really outrageous and awful. And one of the things that we were talking about as we were getting into this is that it's really important that we understand as Americans that, Israel is there to be a military outpost for the United States. We give, multiple billions of dollars of, weapons and money to Israel in order to, hold the line for U.S. imperialist interests.
In that region. Absolutely. Right. I think it's like $4 billion annually. And
$9 billion in 2019.
Yeah, well, that's what it was, right?
And that doesn't even count the billions of dollars of loans, too. That's just
yeah. And that military assistance and, economic, but a lot of that economic is going toward sort of repression. And, it is, we focus a lot on issues of democracy, and there has been scant democracy among Palestinians and people in Gaza in having a fundamental right to decide what goes on in their communities, just in Gaza or the West Bank or Israel itself. So, this battle and this struggle has gone on for decades, and the U.S. has oftentimes been on the wrong side, almost all the time. It's just so very important that we understand what's going on and we try to make, our leaders accountable. It's sort of a third rail, though. Candidates running for office. Where do you stand on Israel? And we just can't afford to come out to say anything against them. It's starting a little bit more because the violations and violence and injustices against international law has been so egregious for so many years, if not decades. I used to work for a Quaker organization, the American Friends Service Committee, and we had an office in Ramallah on the West Bank. And, constantly people were just being treated there so poorly and intimidated and just denied fundamental rights as well as just basic economic necessities. And it's just conditions have just gotten worse. And it's not going to change.
Yeah. And we want to acknowledge the work that BDS, the campaign to call for boycotts and divestments and sanctions against Israel, has done to move this issue into, a mainstream position, advocating for the just humanity and recognition of the rights of Palestinians to exist in their own land. So there has been some movement, and we, oftentimes have critiques of Congress on this program and that move to amend, but we did see a few members of Congress, particularly Rashida Tlaib, whose family is Palestinian and lives in the West Bank, and then also Cori Bush making clear, and that's helpful. And so what people need to do right now is to talk about this. And I would suggest that if you're using social media right now, the place where there is more open and real and legitimate information is on Twitter versus, say, Facebook. And at least that's what I am seeing. And that it is important to elevate the message, the stories. There's video showing, what is happening with these settler situations, really make it sound much more benign than it is. What it is literally people's homes. People are living in their houses. And we're not talking about huts in the desert. We're talking about, a home, just like your home, people living in them, and then having Israeli settlers coming in. Sometimes these are Americans, so they're not even necessarily, people who have been living in Israel. But regardless of that, coming in and just forcibly removing people from their homes, saying that they have no legal right to it. And then these Palestinians are homeless with nowhere to go. And, can you imagine if somebody were to try to do that to you and in your house? And that's the reality. That's how blatant it is. And luckily with cell phones and social media, we can actually see what that looks like, just like we can now see more clearly, what has been happening to the Black community at the hands of police, all along. But it wasn't something that if you were, if you're not part of that community, then you don't know. Well, if we're not in the occupied territories, then we don't know, but we can actually see it on social media now.
Yeah. Question there, relationship between money given to Israel and the arms we sell, Saudi Arabia. Want to take a crack at that?
Well, I mean, that's not my area of to rattle off a bunch of things, but I mean, the money given to Israel to be, our primary, basically, like I said, military outpost, and, all of the ways that the United States government is involved in, the meddling, trying to influence, and trying to either control or a threat to those who would not allow us to, just take the oil resources that are there as freely as we would like to. And I struggle with, I'm even saying we, but I really try on this one. It's it's not we benefit in some ways as Americans, but, these aren't options for us. The choices that are made for how much military spending there is and selling arms to Saudi Arabia, or the amount of military money that is given to Israel, et cetera, all of that it's not like we really get to weigh in on those things.
Yeah. Well, one of the dirty secrets about, whether it's economic aid or military aid to foreign countries is that oftentimes just gets, it never reaches people if it's economic aid. It just goes back to, being used to hire contractors, oftentimes U.S. contractors, to big build dams. That's what the IMF and the World Bank funds are. And in the case of military aid, oftentimes that money is just used then to purchase U.S. made weapons by the likes of, the largest military contractors, the 5 biggest ones in this country. So it's U.S. military weapons that are produced and that are sold, but sold to countries that we just gave money to. In the case of Israel, Egypt, and we oftentimes will sell to both sides, just to sell to both sides and just to keep things sort of quote unquote even, but extremely profitable. And then the other thing about Saudi Arabia, of course, is that, it's so important for U.S. national security, economic security, to make sure that Middle East oil, particularly Saudi oil, is pegged to the dollar. That's what's called the petrodollar. Because the only thing that's given the U.S. dollar basically value these days is if you're any other country, you got to have U.S. dollars to purchase oil, whether it's from Saudi Arabia or from Venezuela or other countries. And so it's absolutely critical that in the eyes of the powers to be in this country, that we control and dominate and have some sort of significant leverage over Saudi Arabia to make sure that they don't do what Saddam Hussein said he was going to do and started to do, which is saying, you know what, I'm willing to accept euros. I'm willing to accept some other currency for Iraqi oil. And that's when the invasion started. And the same, with Gaddafi in selling Libyan oil. He said, I'm going to accept other things, gold, other things for oil. When you go off the dollar standards, then that potentially threatens the entire U.S. economy, beginning to end.
And that's why the issue of how much money to spend on our military budget is something that, for the most part, is absolutely same page. Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. All of Trump's budget proposals were approved by Democrats last time, and you will see that, nothing different is going to continue on because at the end of the day, there's a consensus there between both political parties.
Yep.
So, thanks for your good questions, Jake. What other news did we want to lift up or talk through?
Yeah, well, and just sort of kicking around things. I don't know about you, Kaitlin, or people who are watching or listening, but, when I look at the news, it's like every single day, it seems virtually, there is at least one news item related to the crisis of the environment. We're getting these warning bells, these signals, these, drum rolls, these, crises, warnings of, look out, let's take action. Let's get ahead of the curve. Let's not wait until there's just this, huge, maybe we're already crossing the tipping point, but I mean, there's just news stories galore about, and reports that come out related to, we need to act and act in scale and act with the appropriate speed. That even if we do the right thing, but it's not fast enough, then it's not the right thing. So, I mean, there's all these reports that come out and surveys saying that, we have got to act. A Carbon Disclosure Project that came out report saying that there's, among the major cities of the world, if you look at a global map, where are the major cities of the world? They're on coasts because that's where they, developed and access to water and all, and they're not prepared if the water table goes up, 6 inches or a foot, and they certainly don't have the money for it. I mean, there's a report that just came out, Our Planet, Our Future, an urgent call to action by Nobel laureates and other experts saying that without transformational change, this decade, not by 2050 or 2075, but between now and 2030, at the latest, humanity is taking colossal risks with our common future and society's risk large-scale, irreversible changes to Earth's biosphere and our lives as part of it. I mean, it just, there's hundreds of organizations. There was a story this week of hundreds of organizations calling on Democrats to reject gas and other false climate solutions.
Almost 650. Like, 650. That's a lot of hundreds.
That's a lot. So, and by fake, they say phony or fake solutions. They're talking about fossil fuels, biomass, and nuclear power. No, those don't fall into alternative, legitimate, sustainable energy. And so, I mean, there's just all of these stories coming out, warnings and this and that. But we need to be mindful as we read these and understand these, that, we're finally starting to get to the point where people, unless they are completely living in a different universe, that they are at least acknowledging there is now a climate. You cannot deny the fact that there is a climate crisis and that it is, raging and it needs to be dealt with. The question is, in response to that, is there going to be appropriate response in terms of scale and speed? Or are we, as an article in Naked Capitalism this week pointed to, are we going to be bullshitted? Bullshitted by the governments of the world, by corporations, and the third sector is by finance. And each of those have their own ways that they've been bullshitting us. And that pace of it and sophistication is just going to intensify.
Well, and I would also say that, I'm not sure what's going on here with our sound, but
it's a crisis.
Yeah, well, it's a disaster. And any of the acknowledgement is, it's already way too late. It's really already way too late to save so many species, so much human life, and also to be able to move back to, emissions and carbon levels that are safe for the planet versus where we're headed at full speed right now. So not that we can throw up our hands and say, oops, too late, I guess we can't do anything, we should keep going the way we are. Not at all. But, the crime against humanity and life that is the situation is already, well underway. There's no stopping it. It's just a matter of mitigating it. And, and I would also say that some of the bullshitters are big green nonprofits as well, who are happy to get on to the bandwagon of tiny little Band-Aids that there's no possible way that they could think are going to make a difference. And they know, but that's not what funders want to hear. That's not what the public wants to hear. That's certainly not what power holders want to hear. And so they'll help prop up this idea that, this is going to be okay.
Right. I think one of the more interesting comments that appeared in this article is that it said, quote, "The climate crisis threatens to end our economic system not only if it's ignored, it threatens to end our system if it's addressed. If it's addressed as it should be addressed, which is to call into question, not just sort of nibbling around the edges, but basically, the whole system that we have created that has become so dependent, so wasteful, so destructive, so unsustainable, so creating an economy that looks at nature, that looks at air and water and clean, anything as an externality if we destroy it. That we are going to have to face up to the fact, both as individuals and as societies, that we have to change our lifestyles and we have to fundamentally change our economies. And people don't want to face up to that, both individuals, but even more so our structures, because it calls into question their power and their control and their dominance. And that to create something that is not just more sustainable, but regenerative, can be, by definition, so much more decentralized. And by decentralized, it means it's not centralized, which means it's not in control by a single or small number of monopolistic or oligopolistic political or economic entities or people.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I feel like the crux of it, if we really get to it, is the idea that human beings have a right to have dominion over this planet. And that's like the original sin. And unless we peel that back and unlearn that, really, then, we're going to continue to perpetuate the systems that we have now that are at their heart rooted in that idea.
Yeah. And how it connects to the work we do is, we've spoken about, again, the political pressure on public officials that comes from the fossil fuel industry through lobbying and campaign financing to perpetuate it, but also how corporate entities are, hiding behind this thing called the Fifth Amendment. That, if they really truly want to put the kibosh on what many people say is absolutely necessary to save what's left of the environment, keeping fossil fuels in the ground, hey, they can threaten, if not actually execute that threat by saying, by keeping that, we've got permits to exploit, to drill, to mine, to plunder, to do anything else, to take out, to exploit oil from the ground or coal, whatever, that is potentially lost future profits that amounts to the tens of trillions of dollars. So, so long as that's sort of a given, we are in deep trouble. And that's why our amendment, another reason why it's so important.
Well, and why we not look at this as the problem, the be all end all problem being, the amount of money in politics, because yes, corporations and the wealthy are able to manipulate the political system to get, lawmakers in who they support 100%. That's true. But it goes beyond that. The ways that corporations are able to manipulate the entire really legal system, because the foundation of it is the Constitution. And so when they're able to wield that Constitution against the public, against communities trying to defend the planet or other things, workers and just community well-being, then, how can we possibly say that this is anything like a democracy?
And let's be mindful that when we're talking about, the negative plight of environmental degradation, who's on the front lines of that? Mm-hmm. It's not the super duper wealthy individuals, is it? It's frontline communities of low-income people, native indigenous people, people of color, Black and brown people who live in places that, have already been exploited environmentally. And those things are just going to get worse.
Absolutely. And actually, I want to just put in a little plug here for a podcast that I am working on with a number of other people from Move to Amend. It's not officially a Move to Amend project. It's a Democracy Unlimited project. But our next episode will be out this weekend. And our guest on the show was Eleanor Goldfield, who just came out, who is a great activist in many different areas. But she just came out with a documentary film about the work that's happening in West Virginia to challenge, the switch over from coal to fracking and natural gas, and the communities that have been devastated, bringing in, indigenous communities who have been working against mountaintop removal. And it's a really great film. It was a really good conversation with her. And if you go to agitatedpodcast.com, and subscribe to the podcast when we drop the next episode this weekend, you can tune in, and I hope everybody will. And Eleanor is a good friend of Move to Amend as well. And she's helped us get the word out about the work that we do. And we really respect the work that she does. And she's just a great person to listen to in terms of her, her perspective and her organizing experience. And it ties to all of this.
Yeah. Everybody should listen. Look forward to listening to that. Great.
Well, all right. What else should we talk about? What's the next thing?
Oh, gosh. There's also been a number of pieces here this week related to voting rights and all the horrific efforts by our GOP friends that are trying to, suppress, repress, put the kibosh on anything. And it's not just sort of public officials, but they've got a lot of allies. And their allies happen to be corporate entities. And in some cases, the same entities that were a couple of months ago when the insurrection, January 6th, took place, saying, we're not going to fund any candidates who are behind that, are now like behind the scenes meeting and is being exposed, sort of meeting behind closed doors saying, what can we do now to sort of get back into the mix? And so there's been a number of reports out and stories out about that. There was a leaked video that apparently Mother Jones just this week exposed, in which a private meeting was held last month by some individuals connected and working with various corporations and big money donors. And so the head of this
Heritage Foundation.
Heritage Foundation, we all know our friends at Heritage. Before there was ALEC and the horrible stuff of ALEC, many of the horrible things that we associate with coming out of think tanks and all came from Heritage, as well as American Enterprise Institute. So here's Heritage, private meeting. They met with some big money donors, and the head of this group, Blasted, that are outfitted, crafted the new voter suppression laws in Georgia that was doing same or similar bills for Republican state legislators across the country. So what they're doing is, they're being the front group. They're developing these templates. They're working with state legislators, kind of what like ALEC does, but specifically targeting and specifically working on voter suppression bills and doing that writing, doing all the heavy lifting and, just getting those out there. And, Heritage is fun. Who funds Heritage? Some well-to-do people, but also corporate entities. So that was sort of one real expose that took place this week. Another sort of related is that some of the same political action committees that, as mentioned at the top of this, that moved, prior or just after January 6th and said, we aren't going to fund any Republican office holder that supported the insurrection or supported, not acknowledging the legitimacy of the 2020 race. We're not going to fund those people. Well, now they're having second thoughts, and this group called the National Association of Business PACs, which is the trade association for corporate PACs, had a webinar, and a guy named Haim, who was sort of doing this webinar. This was back in March, but apparently this has just come to the surface. This group is made up of 250 corporate PACs. Many of them have, for years, if not decades, donated to corporate entities. And so in this webinar, this guy encouraged companies not to be pressured to withhold donations for Republicans who voted to overturn the election. Instead, he said, quote, corporations should do what's right for your organization and deal with the fallout. He predicted that resuming contributions to Republican objectors, quote, most likely would be a one-day story, and most likely you're not going to lose customer share over it, unquote. Ultimately, he emphasized the need for corporations to change their messaging rather than their behavior. So, this was just sort of an effort to try to work with his clients to get them to be back in the mix. Because quite honestly, these entities, companies, they want to continue to contribute or invest because they're getting a hell of a lot more dollars back in contracts and tax breaks and loopholes than they put in.
And so outrageous. And we talked last week. I was also on last week with Jessica, and we talked about how, on the other side then is this effort to try and pressure corporations to withhold donations, by Democrats and Democrat-leaning people. And it makes sense given this, that this is like a debate in terms of, how will corporations weigh in on these political questions, and voter, the ability for everyone to vote and have easy voting access, et cetera, et cetera. But from our perspective, the solution is not to get corporations to do good things versus bad things. Corporations shouldn't have influence on our political process. It shouldn't be up to them. It shouldn't be up to their money to either be withheld or, given. Both are wrong. Both move us in the wrong direction. These are choices that are political choices that should not be made in corporate boardrooms. These are societal questions for us to handle. And we should be free of their meddling one way or the other.
That's right. They shouldn't be in the game at all. Shouldn't have a seat at the table.
Okay,
Yeah.
and continuing on, HR1 is being debated in the Senate, and maybe we'll move forward. HR1 being a bill that we have followed. It obviously has has a number of connections to the work that we do, a number of good policies as it relates to voting access, as it relates to gerrymandering, but some deeply problematic policies as it relates to campaign finance. In a nutshell, ways that the political parties, as the corporations that they are, to have much more influence over candidate races, and also the ability for independent candidates to access public money to support being able to get, on the ballot and available for the public to support. And so the stranglehold that the two political corporate parties have over the whole system will be reinforced and continued if HR1 passes as it is currently written. So we've been following that. I don't know, Greg, if there's anything else that you want to add.
Well, it's interesting. It's sort of hard to follow sometimes, but I've read where there's some energy being put to, maybe as an alternative, at least right now, we should try to maybe beef up the John Lewis bill that deals exclusively with sort of the voter suppression piece. And that's certainly something that absolutely needs to happen positively to counter all of these efforts in these states. And that may be a pretty good thing that could be passed in the short term right now. And even the Joe Manchin guy in West Virginia, I think, is somewhat open to that. Because right now, unless you get him to support HR1, that's not going to pass. And of course, we're concerned, as you've said, with the several parts of the campaign finance, money in politics part of that. So maybe that is something that we will see sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and to that end, there is good work that's being done by, some of the good government groups that, frankly, we often disagree with when it comes down to corporate personhood, because they're not willing to advocate against all corporate constitutional rights and support the We the People Amendment. But, I think we got to acknowledge that the John Lewis, I don't know, I'm not saying the full name, but act. Something act.
Yeah, voting rights act, maybe.
Right. Yeah, that sounds right. Is good policy.
Yeah, what it doesn't deal with, and I don't know if it's possible to add this in, that the For the People Act does do, that is really important, that again is horrific, what GOPers are doing around the country is, screwing around with the gerrymandering. And so figuring out ways, because that is a changing the rules of the game as well. By trying to, some states are, dealing with that state by state, some better than others, and trying to create quote unquote nonpartisan commissions and all. But God, we got to get a handle on dealing with this gerrymandering question. It's just atrocious.
All right, where do you want to go next?
How about the NRA? Hear about this? The NRA, they've just been a real nefarious outfit here for the last couple of years. Money disappearing and, what's going on, their policies. They are losing members and never mind their policies coming out just being so extremists, even against basic background checks that 90% of the public supports. But they've been effective because they've thrown their political weight around, their never intended constitutional rights around. But because of the lack of fiscal accountability internally, the state of New York began an investigation. They are chartered. They're headquartered in Virginia, but they're chartered. So their basic license to exist since 1871 has been in the state of New York. And so, like all companies, nonprofits, for-profits, whatever, you have to file annual thing and report, and wait a second, a few things not adding up. And they began investigation and discovered that they were, that there was some fiscal improprieties. So serious, in fact, that the state of New York took them to court and threatened to revoke their charter, their license to exist. At which point, then NRA decided, okay, we're going to do similar to what companies in the past did when they tried to escape democratic control by being licensed in one state. They would take off for another state. Before, it used to be New Jersey and then later Delaware, because they out New Jersey, and being so pro-corporate. In this case, NRA decided we're going to change our incorporation from the state of New York. We're going to go to Texas because, of course, Texas is, you name it, very pro-gun and very pro-corporate. And so they tried to reincorporate there as a way to avoid being litigated in the same way. They thought maybe they'd get, hand slapped in Texas instead of New York. And so it's gone to court. It was challenged by state of New York, and state of New York said, sorry. It's one thing if you are, declaring bankruptcy, and that's what NRA was doing, declaring bankruptcy, and therefore trying to charter somewhere else. Well, that's not the motive for why you're trying to move. It's not to declare bankruptcy because whatever, you spent more than you took in because the economy is down, or, you're a good service and you were providing more service to people who were in need or whatever. No, it was because of scamming and the like. And so, as the judge said, you're not getting off the hook. We're not going to allow you to recharter. You are going to have to sort of face the music in the state of New York. So that's kind of where it stands now. And, it's a very small instance, very small, of where the chartering process, used to be sort of a democratic instrument to define and control and authorize what companies could and could not do, with the charter being a democratic instrument of the state, of the legislature, and by extension, the people who, we elect these legislators. So that's kind of where it is now. They're probably not going to get off the hook. They're going to have to, probably some people are going to go to jail.
Yeah, which, can you imagine if the charter, if the, de-chartering process was that every state that has corporations chartered there, has the authority to revoke charters. And at this point, so much of what corporations do that causes harm is perfectly legal because they've been able to change and manipulate the legal system. So, there's this, using the de-chartering process would be, a fraction of the harm would be addressed. But imagine if it even was, if the, the corporate death penalty actually was a thing that was used. You've caused so much harm and damage that we're done with you.
It's happened before New York. Remember, when was it? Back in the 80s or 90s? The two tobacco corporate front groups, they were saying, oh, no, you can smoke forever and it doesn't cause cancer. Their charters were dissolved. So,
well, it's interesting that it seems like, in the modern era, it's only happened to nonprofit corporations,
right.
Which is where so much of this harm happens, which is why it's so important that the We the People Amendment is clear that we're talking about all artificial entities, not just for-profit corporations. And that's a distinction that sometimes gets drawn, pushed back on us, again, by, some of the large, powerful nonprofits that oftentimes are doing good work in other areas, but are nervous about the idea of corporations not having constitutional rights if it applies to nonprofits too. But every powerful corporation has a nonprofit lobby that they use, and an industry group or 10 at their disposal. And so at this point, there is no distinction that we can make between nonprofits and for-profits as if one is good and one is bad.
That's right. Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Also, a little aside, I did not realize that the NRA was founded in 1871. Oh my God. Guns were pretty different in 1871. That's
well, it was all for hunting, or back then they had all these gun, shooting tournaments, and I mean that was a sport.
Yeah.
Shooting guns was not just shooting animals, but just Annie Oakley. I mean, people, you would go and watch people at the equivalent of tournaments. People like shooting for accuracy and all. So.
Very different time.
Very
But also interesting that there needed to be like an advocacy organization even back in 1871 when guns, as you said, were so prevalent and, also so much more, you've always been able to kill people with a gun, but it's quite a bit different than these military grade weapons that are meant to, decimate buildings from.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on. What else do you want to hit here? Do we want to do all of these?
There's so much. I'd love to talk about the breaking up big defense.
Okay.
This was an article in, of all places, American Conservative, the AmericanConservative.com. Hardly the sort of place you would find at first glance an article about saying, wait a second, there's all this effort by, our friends on the right, the Cruzes, Hawleys, and the like, to go after big tech. Okay, that may be legit, maybe not, maybe it is. But you guys should be looking at another industry where there is an incredible amount of concentration and monopolization, and that's the military industry. The military industrial complex and the like. A handful of enormous firms dominate the production and sale of everything from fighter aircraft to cybersecurity services. The end result has been predictable. Fewer suppliers mean higher prices, worse contract outcomes, and a far shakier defense industrial base. And then it talks about some of these, incredible boondoggles, maybe atop the list of wasting billions of dollars is the F-35 fighter jet. And it just says, we got to get a handle on this. And it talks, quotes Admiral Hyman Rickover, the father of the nuclear navy, warned that the enormous resources of defense giants often enable them to, quote, exercise greater power than elected or appointed government officials, but with far less transparency or accountability. Whoa! These guys are coming out and they're just, laying it out that 50% of, the 5 largest companies, military contractors, we've just seen since sort of Clinton days, an incredible consolidation of all of these companies into where there's just basically now only 5 of them. And they just dominate. They dominate the industry. And of course, they dominate when it comes to political campaign contributions. And maybe the most interesting part of this article is at the end it says, okay, what are the options? One is, all right, Biden has spoken about maybe, starting or increasing or giving more resources to antitrust. But you know what? Maybe there's another alternative. Nationalization, full or partial. Basically, government just basically takes over the industry. So you don't have these private entities that do their own thing and try to cover up, shield, say for national defense or security purposes, we can't, talk about what's going on. They're pretty much de facto state agencies now, but they're still private. They make enormous profit, and we don't know oftentimes what the hell they're doing. So here, state ownership of defense companies, to the extent we even have them in the way they operate and in terms of reflecting our foreign policy, that's sort of a whole other question. But let's think about nationalization. Coming from the American Conservative, pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's it's also pretty, it's just, if you take a step back, it's just crazy that it is private. It's sort of like prisons too. It's like, why would the defense of a nation be something that, private interests should be able to make money off of? And we live in the world that obviously is the natural outgrowth of when you do that, which is crazy. And, therefore we get into wars sometimes that is just really for the purposes of so that we can, justify buying more weapons from these folks or giving them to the police to attack civilians, right, because there needs to be a market for where to sell them.
Again, remember, a lot of times Congress is pressured and Congress will ask for more money than what the military even wants. That has happened in the past. And a lot of times that's because they get pressured by the military industrial complex. To do that. And so, another interesting sentence in this article is that it makes more sense to treat defense production as a public utility than a series of private monopolies. Just as you say, other things why do we have private things? Utility companies is another thing, right? Why are electric companies, regulated? Shouldn't they just be public?
Right. And then we would have Republicans talking about how we really need to decrease the the military budget because it's part of government, which they hate. Which is maybe the one time I would get on board with making it smaller.
So anyway, interesting piece there that just kind of surprised me. So.
All right. Well, is that our full list of roundup from this week? I think that it might be.
There's tons more, but that may be enough.
All right. Well, if there's anything that anybody else, you guys have been chiming in, apologies to our Facebook listeners. As Alfonso posted, apparently we had some tech problems in the live stream on Facebook. Did get started late, but we've been on YouTube and Twitter this whole time. So if there's anything that you want to mention, I think JD, you were trying when you posted the thing on YouTube about I've lost track of it, chemicals and shale gas development disrupting endocrine systems. My sense was that was an article rather than a question to us. However, we're not able to see a link to an article, but based on what you said, that you would like to share, the sense I get is that this is meant to be an article. So if you want to try again and actually put the URL, the actual address of the of this article, then others would be able to see it. And certainly that's concerning. And this has actually been a topic that's been in the news quite a lot lately. The news and analysis of the fact that sperm counts as a species are dropping incredibly, and largely linked to toxic chemicals, and there's going to be major impacts on reproduction for humans as a result of these toxic chemicals. So that's probably something that could be a whole other conversation as well, but we didn't pick that up this week. But thank you for sharing the article. I'm still not seeing the link to it, but I'm not sure if that's just kind of in the format that we're in. So apologies if we're not able to get that. And yeah, if anybody else has any other topics that you want us to cover or that you want to bring up or questions that you want to ask us about Move to Amend or anything that we've been through, we'll do our best to answer. We'll take a couple of minutes. Also, as we're waiting to see if there are any, just want to let you guys know that we're going to take a indefinite break from Making Sense this starting after today, so we won't be here next week, and I want to encourage all of you to put on your calendar and tune in and join us when we do the live report, which is always the last Wednesday of every month at 5:00 Pacific time, 8:00 Eastern time on all three of these channels. So you can come here. We also send an email out to our list if we've got your email. So if you haven't signed up there yet, make sure you do. Go to movetoamend.org/motion to sign the motion. We also use that list of people when we lobby your representative at the state or federal level, and just make clear that the number of constituents in their district who are calling for the We the People amendment. So that's the easiest way and the first best way to support Move to Amend and to share that petition. And also that will get you on our email list, which, we never share with anybody and we try not to bombard you, but you can also always change your unsubscribe if you don't want to get the emails. But if you do, then you can know to get posts about when we go live and whatnot. Jake, appreciate your support. The amount of time that this takes us for the output of people listening has not been really what we would want it to be. So we're going to pull back, reassess, and I'd encourage you to join us for the live report. And then also, if you guys want us to be on here more, then making sure that we're reaching more people and sharing these broadcasts, connecting people to Move to Amend, bringing them in is the way to maximize our time.
If you are on our mailing list, that is another way to get this kind of information, not quite in this concentrated way of 5 or 6 or more articles per week, but we send out every week a couple of email blasts, we call them. And they're not just, hey, contact your representative or hey, can you spare a nickel or two? but they're content related. I mean, there's some excellent content that speaks to the issues of the day, oftentimes. And Shelley Williams, who sort of coordinates those, does a terrific job in making those blasts contemporary and focusing on the issues of the day. So again, if you're going into withdrawal from Making Sense, do sign up. Make sure you're on our email list so you can get those blasts.
And also one of the things that we want to do as part of the pullback and reassessment over the summer is look at, the video. And one of the things that we're realizing, just to be fully transparent, is that Facebook and Twitter, which is where most of our viewers are coming from for these broadcasts, are really not a format where doing an hour-long conversation is likely to grab people's attention. We get a lot of people checking it out, but then, they're in scroll mode and they're not necessarily going to stop and stay with us for an hour. And so trying to figure out more effective ways to reach more people and get the word out, because that's actually why we do this. So if you've got suggestions or support to offer there, then by all means we're open. But we're pulling back in order to hopefully take what we put forward next in a way that better utilizes the medium. And I see Jake, that you're on YouTube, which is a place where people do tend to stick around for a little bit longer and watch longer videos. But
with the short attention spans, remember that thing? What was it called? Vine? Where they had like 6 seconds.
Yeah, that was the thing for a second.
6 seconds? Thank God that died.
Right. Well, but Instagram and TikTok, and it's still 15, which is not much more than 6.
Yeah, I know.
30. Just answer. We spoke to this at the beginning, but Lawrence, why is HJR 48, 117th Congress not listed on Congress.gov website? We talked about this at the beginning of the show, and it's because they're still only on 45, and we just got caught in this holding pattern this time where the clerk went ahead and allowed it to be introduced officially. So it has been introduced, but it's not on Congress.gov because they're still on number 45 as opposed to 48. So need 2 more introductions. We were really hoping that would happen this week when Congress went back in session, but they didn't. So never seen this before. Normally they're up to a much higher number by now, but
yeah, it's gotten to the place of where we're almost wishing some of the more anemic alternative money in politics stuff gets introduced.
Any proposals?
Right. Please introduce those half measures so that we can get to 48.
Or not. It's weird. I don't quite actually know what the rule is of what is a joint resolution versus a resolution. Because if you look at the list, sometimes it's something that's like proclamation of such and such day. So I don't know, but whatever it is, they need 2 more and then we'll be there. But the amendment has been introduced. People can be added as co-sponsors. We announced it at the beginning of this the program, but those of you who are on Facebook, it seems like missed it. So, we did have 4 additions this week. Doris Matsui from my district here in Sacramento, California. Tim Ryan from Ohio. Adriano Espiat from New York. And who was the other one? Don Bayer from Virginia. Got added on this week. And then we have gotten news about a couple others as well that, haven't officially. So
what are we up to now, Kaitlin?
We are at 55 if you count Pramila Jayapal as patient 1. So yeah. We still have a ways to go to get to our goal of 100 for the year. So we need your help, and please go to movetoamend.org/117 campaign so that we can get that number up to 100. And Lawrence wants to know if we can create sing and dance with small furry animals. Well, small furry animals always make for good video in my book.
How about a small troll?
I'm not sure that would make me tune in. I would much rather see
cats. Maybe not. Oh well.
But we could all bring our cats to our broadcasts. Yeah. That would probably. Oh, and speaking of, we are going to do a couple of so the next live report will be on May 26th. It's always the last Wednesday of the month. So put that on your calendar, 5:00 Pacific, 8 Eastern. But that week as well, we'll be going live several times because we will be doing a fundraising drive kicking off on Monday. So we'll have broadcasts on Monday and on Wednesday and on Friday that week. And it'll be an opportunity for us probably to have some conversation like we do on making sense here too, and talking about whatever's going on at that time. So stay tuned. And again, getting on our email list is the best way for you to know when we go live and for you to tune in. So let's be in touch there. Greg, anything else you want to add?
I don't know. A fundraising pitch?
Oh yeah, do it.
Well,
you don't have to wait till the 24th.
You don't have to wait. You can weigh in now. Anything you can help us out with. We are independent from big corporations, from government, from millionaires, billionaires, from even labor unions and political parties. But we pay a price for that, which means that we don't know at the beginning of the year if we're going to have enough to make it through, but we have confidence that we will because of people like you. And so to be politically independent, you have to be economically independent. They go together, and that's a choice we have consciously made. That's the only way to be truly accountable and responsible to people at the grassroots. But the only way that's going to work is if people at the grassroots who believe in what we're doing can, to the extent they can, help us out. So please do consider doing that by going to movetomen.org/donate. Thank you.
Sorry to run away, but she walked by and I thought I'd give you your small
Oh, there you go.
you want. Here at the end.
Now we'll get the legions of people watching.
That's right. That's right. This is Luchadora, everybody. All right. Well, I think with that, we're probably done. Thanks, Alfonso, for doing the engineering.
Thank you so much, Alfonso, all these weeks.
As always. And Alfonso also does that for the live report, so his fingerprints will be on that still. And thanks for tuning in and your support for Move to Amend. Have a good weekend. And please go to a solidarity with Palestinian people protest if there's one near you this weekend.
That's right. Be well, all.
Bye.